Dad, we're putting the spotlight on you.
Oh, wow.
We're going to talk a little bit about your journey at North Group Consultants.
Mm-hmm.
So why don't you just start by telling us how you got into business? How did you start North Group Consultants 24 years ago?
24 years ago. Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, I was in another profession, happened to be insurance for the first 16 years of my career out of college. And that, honestly, it was a very fulfilling profession for me. I had some great opportunities. I had all great employers. The last employer I had, they were just outstanding business people. And I learned how to, or by watching, I learned how to run a business in a process-oriented way, have the right meetings, have the right information, have the right plans. And they did all those things. And I learned by being a part of that management team. But there came a point for me, and it was completely a spiritual point when I don't know how accessible this language would be to some folks who are listening, but I really felt that God was telling me I needed to be doing something else, and it didn't make a ton of sense because we were on an okay, American dream building type of path, but the message was so clear that I felt like I had no choice but to follow it. And fortunately, I have a loving and supportive wife, and she knew that I was praying and thinking through some things. So when I resigned my prior job, she was supportive of that, and we had a little bit of savings that could take us through that period of time. And so I went through a 3-month period of just visiting with my network and receiving input from them. And somehow out of this, along with my original partner, who was very encouraging and very invitational, this idea of a consulting firm came about. Back then we called it management consulting. Now we call it leadership and organizational development, but the concept was there. And it was interesting for me because, a lot of people are driven in their life by the sense of, I've got to do my own thing. I've got to have my own business. I don't like working for other people. None of those things were a part of my experience. That was never compelling for me. It wasn't even a dream for me. It's just what evolved out of this time period, that what we wanted to do needed to be done by us rather than attaching to somebody else. And I guess I would say the concept, at least at that time, was unique enough that there was really nobody around that was doing that. So I couldn't go to somebody and say, hey, you're already doing this. Can I join up with you? And that was the original genesis of the business. And, I guess some of those original thoughts still exist today, but like most businesses, it's grown and developed. And for us, it's mostly grown and developed out of the needs of our clients. I'm not a particularly creative person, and we don't go into R&D and say, hey, what new service or product should we roll out? We listen to our clients. And they'll often say, hey, North Group, could you help me with X? And then we think about, okay, does it make sense for us to provide that service to them? And the fact that we're already in relationship with them makes it easier. That's how our services have evolved over the years.
I want to go back to just a little bit more about the very beginning, because it's not like you starting the business led by this calling, if we can say that, came without any economic risk, because a lot of us get into business or start our businesses, and there's maybe a stronger economic component there. Well, I'm stuck where I am, and I don't see the growth pattern. I think I could do this better myself, or like you said, might be for a control reason. I've had this dream to own a business, but you were in a point where you're on a good track, if we can say that, career-wise. You were getting close to kind of the midpoint of your career. You had a young family.
You were 6 years old.
I was 6. My older sister Laura would have been 9, and Kirsten would have just been born.
9, 6,
so
1.
We talked in the beginning of the series about having a compelling why. And I just want to make sure we understand your why was this call. You felt like you were being called to do something different. How did you discover that?
Yeah, well, again, these things generally don't come in a flash of lightning.
Yeah.
Although I would say I had one of those. A friend had given me a book the year before. It was, a lot of people have read it. It was 25, 30 years ago, but the name of the book is Halftime, and the overall idea, the subtitle was Changing Your Game Plan from Success to Significance. And in the middle of the book, the author challenged you to write a personal mission statement. Well, I read lots of these books, and I've never really stopped to actually do the exercise that the author says you should do. But in that case, I did. And I don't remember how much time or effort I put into it, but I wrote it on a Post-it note. And I put it on my bureau, my chest of drawers. And when this concept of a management, now leadership and organizational development consulting firm came along, it fit.
Wow.
And that became my why. And that is, with a little bit of wordsmithing, that is our mission statement even today. To support the development of leaders and their organizations toward their highest potential. That is my personal mission statement, and it continues to be that of our company. So that was a pretty strong why for me, because it fit together so well and felt like there was a legacy building spiritual kind of purpose to it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I want to point out, because it might lead to some other conversations, is I had a partner originally. And we were very good friends. I had a lot of confidence in her. I think she had confidence in me. And doing something with somebody rather than alone was really helpful. The other thing it helped me with is when she moved on after 5 years, and when we did a little transaction to make that happen relatively seamlessly, I knew I needed to be in ownership with other people. And part of the gift was I didn't start the business when I was 20. I started the business a little later in life, when I had a little bit more opportunity for self-discovery and self-awareness. And I knew that one of my Achilles heel, it remains to this day, is thinking that I'm right. I arrive at conclusions. You and I arrive at conclusions and theories, more quickly than other people. Sometimes they turn out to be correct. Other times they're badly flawed. But I knew that I had a penchant for wanting to be independent. And I knew that wasn't good for my life going forward. And I didn't think it would be good for the business going forward. So I have always, without exception, had partners.
Yeah.
And then that set the wheels in motion in place, whereas as we developed together as equity partners, it also put in place what a lot of other business owners don't have, but was a gift to me, is trustworthy partners who were interested in succession. So while my original reason for always having partners in the business was more personal behavior oriented, if you will, to keep me in check, so to speak, it was a gift in that it had me farther down the succession line when it became time to talk about succession, which was, for all practical purposes, about 6 years ago.
And you felt like the basis for understanding that about yourself was just your own self-awareness.
Yeah.
And that would be something we would say is important for leaders and business leaders, especially as you're moving through an internal succession, is you need to understand yourself fairly well.
Yeah.
So that you're not too surprised when you're either frustrated, excited, encouraged, despondent. All those emotions are going to come up, and you have to try to get ahead a little bit of why am I feeling so charged up this morning? It's because we had that conversation, and I know that my partners are with me, and we're all driving towards the same thing.
Why am I annoyed this morning? And how do I normally behave when I am annoyed? And is that good for other people? And is there anything I can do to work my way out of that, or at least blunt the effect of that? That's a whole conversation you and I can have some other day. But yeah, a certain amount of self-knowledge was I was partway through, as you said, almost halfway through my career at this point, and it allowed me an understanding that I would likely function much better in the future if I had essentially had accountability.
Yep.
And so I've been gifted ever since with just highly committed, trustworthy, competent people to help me run the business well, even though the business is small.
Yep. Yep. And that's an enormous blessing, of course.
It is an enormous blessing.
So where did the transition start, and how did it happen of, well, I need partners for the best of the business, for the best of me, to we're ready to really do a full-blown succession plan here?
Yeah, we had mentioned in a prior podcast that, for most businesses, it's going to take a certain number of years to just find your footing. And for me, it was probably somewhere between 10 and 15 years before my economic situation was even reflective of the economic situation prior to starting the business. That wasn't a negative thing. It was just the nature of building a business. And I never wanted to do it alone. So each time we got to a point where maybe we were doing a little bit better financially, then we hired somebody else
Sure.
because we made an investment, because we wanted to continue to grow. And I never look back on that and say that was negative. I think it was always positive. So somewhere, probably around the 15-year point or so, we knew that the business was sustainable and it had, ongoing value. We had something of a flywheel going in terms of people being referred to our firm, being able to find employees when we needed them, that sort of thing. So I had equity partners at that point, and this was always in my mind that the more good people I could collect, some of whom, collect isn't the right term, attract to the firm, that some of them would be interested in equity ownership. And in a couple cases, probably would have only come with that opportunity being put directly before them. So then I had to make decisions then. Oh, okay, boy, that's going to become part of the package somehow. How do I make that happen in a way that has clarity and trustworthiness? So, so we got to a point where we felt like it was just time to enter into this process. And part of the driver for us was that at the time I had 4 equity partners, that we're fairly closely grouped with respect to age. And make no mistake, you well know this, you're a money man, that makes it harder.
Yes.
That makes it harder. How do we do these structured buyouts? So we already knew that just because we're engaged in that on behalf of other people, and we wanted to make sure we applied it well to ourselves. So that was the necessity of starting early, and so we probably started in an intentional process about 6 years ago, when I was still a majority owner.
Yes. And so we've talked about a lot the basis for how do you do this well. And so obviously 6 years ago you said, hey, we're ready to do this more intentionally. Here's how we're going to go about it. We're going to have these types of conversations at these times. You eventually put a time stake in the ground. You're following your own advice, right? But of course, along the way, everything doesn't go exactly as we think it's going to go. At what times did you run into some challenges, and how did you recognize them and then work through them to continue on the path to succession? Yeah,
good question. I think immediately two things would come to mind. One was that we got to a point in the facility or the building that we were in a number of years ago where we knew we had outgrown it. But I would admit that I was dragging my feet from moving on from that, because I had some heart and soul in the building we were in. We had bought it and renovated it and all this kind of thing.
Well, and heart and soul, you had, when you opened the building, you had clients, friends, myself, write a Sharpie note to you on the porch of your office.
True.
You had that laminated. So there was some almost literal heart and soul there too. You would see it on the floor every time.
It was hard for me to think about moving beyond that building, and I probably handicapped the growth of the business a little bit. But then when we came to terms with, hey, we need to find another building, this was one of the bumps in the road. Is we actually, I don't know how many people know this, but we actually bought another building, pretty significant investment, and started into a planning and renovation process, which very quickly became evident that it wasn't going to work financially. And for a group of 5 business people who had a pretty good track record of making good financial conservative decisions, to run into a roadblock like that and to realize, hey, we didn't count enough of the cost beforehand before we did this. We thought we had, but it quickly became clear. So that was a roadblock. We overcame that. We were able to sell the building, swallow some of our financial losses, and move on. But it nevertheless probably put us back about a year in the process, because our energy, our on the business energy, was invested in that process rather than this. Then there was a second time that was more personally induced, and it was all in 1 hour. And so we had this process where we were meeting, I think it was every quarter, we would go off site. And I'll quickly tell this story, but it's a story on myself where it was a Friday afternoon. I even remember where we were. And one of my partners was giving a report on an area that we had asked him to research. And I don't know, just the things that are human in us, the things that aren't always perfect. I just thought the report was flawed. And I didn't even let him get through the report, and I just ripped into it. And I shouldn't have done it. I'm embarrassed to even relate it to you now, but it's a true story. And I just, to use the vernacular, I would say I threw up all over it. And it just, fortunately, it's not my normal behavior, but it's what happened. A Friday afternoon, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and one of the other guys that was there said, "Well, I think we're just going to need to take a break and go home now." And we did. But as soon as the guys left the room, I knew I had blown it. And one of them stayed behind, I think, and said, "Roger, you're going to have to make this right." And so we did. And I'm fortunate that I have my friends and partners have a lot of forbearance and still love me, and even in my humanness. But that was a watershed moment for us, because it pointed out that the relationships weren't quite where they needed to be in order to initiate an actual financial transaction. So that was the day, if you will, where we decided that our relationships needed to drive the financial transaction and not the other way around. And in too many cases, I'd like people to think about this. They use a financial transaction. We're going to start gifting to our son and daughter. We're going to ask this guy that we're not quite sure about to buy into the business. They use a financial transaction to drive the relational growth in the business. And that, in my view, is a flawed strategy.
And you're specifically referring to the relationships of you and your other partners,
your successors, the people that you're going to run the rocky road with, the rocky road of ownership, which has its pitfalls.
What was the immediate follow-up from that? Was it simply you reflected and you recognized, whoa, I messed up here? Meet with that individual, apologize, go from
just
there.
Deal with it, Roger. It was very poor behavior. It was behavior inconsistent with my values, the values of the firm, and there simply was no option. But of course, there's apology, and then there forgiveness, which was freely extended, which I'm very grateful for. And then there's the question of is your behavior going to be different moving forward? And of course, that was a path that I needed to work on, but I also needed their help to work on, because what really came out of that was my voice was always the loudest voice in the room. And it wasn't really my intention, but it was the effect. And until we cured that, we weren't ready to go down the succession path together. So we spent about 2 years working on that, to the point where it became clear that I wasn't always carrying the day. And if you really think about the entity as being more important than the individual, which is something you and I would both believe in, if the entity is more important than the individual, hopefully sooner or later the individual, in this case me, will recognize it's ridiculous to think that you always have the best idea or will always make the best decision for the entity. A number of times, yes, I have good insight and I've been gifted with some experience and some wisdom, but all the time, that's ridiculous. And so we had to create just a better conversational, relational, communicative, cohesive environment where the best ideas carried the day, not necessarily the person who was putting his ideas forward most forcefully or most articulately.
And so that was a watershed moment really for two reasons. One, relationally, for you, probably that particular partner, but your partner group as a whole. But it also revealed something deeper down in the culture of your ownership group, which was, wow, I didn't realize this, or maybe I just didn't recognize it. or we haven't had a moment to bring it to light.
I think everybody knew it but me. I was thinking, hey, I have all these smart guys, and smart was an understatement.
Yeah.
These guys, trustworthy, and I seem to always get the last word. And I was actually a little frustrated with that. I'm thinking, a couple of these guys are clearly smarter than me. Some of them had better, more broad experience than me. And I'm like, why don't they speak up? And I finally realized the why didn't they speak up had everything to do with me, little to do with them, and so I needed to change my behavior. And so we worked on that together, and I think that was productive.
And I think it'd be reasonable for us to say you should expect some of those moments.
Sure.
Maybe you don't have to.
Doesn't mean I'm not still embarrassed about it.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And maybe it doesn't always need to be that deep of a valley. Maybe it does. And I know in a lot of cases, you and I have both been in the situations where you had a successor who you thought was all into the succession plan, and they leave, or another opportunity comes up. You have to be prepared for those bumps in the road as you are, and make sure that you turn them into an opportunity to move forward from a better foundation. And that's
very well said.
And that's exactly what you've done. And you're now to the point where you're well into your succession plan, and you're staring at a date. You put that stake in the ground. So what's the process to get there? Because we're going to be sitting here together a few years from now, and you're no longer going to be a shareholder of the firm you started.
Yeah, it's a process. It's evolutionary. It's, if you will, bathed in prayer and support and confidence. And again, I think what really drives it is I've never departed from the why that we talked about earlier, and really a very firm belief that the organization will be better in the future. That we're on a continuous improvement path, that we're providing more and more value to our clients all the time, and that I surely do not have a corner on how to accomplish that. And so giving way to people with experience in different areas, different life experiences, and bright creative minds that we've been fortunate to attract gives me a lot of confidence it's going to work out just fine.
Yeah. And all on a foundation of trust.
Yep.
And back to those 3 C's, as you said as well: cohesion, clarity, communication. You've applied all those, and sure, there's still going to be some challenges. There's probably still going to be some days that you wake up and maybe even feel some, oh wow, I'm going to miss this.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss being an owner of the firm.
Yeah, sure.
There's going to be some tough moments, but that why is out there, and that why doesn't move. And that's why I think our why needs to be something more than just what's going on in the moment in time that we think it's time to start a business, time a succession plan. It has to be something that can last and in a way be a North Star to us as we go through the journey.
I certainly agree with that. Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your journey, Dad. I think I'm next up. We're going to talk a little about it from
we're going to reverse roles from what I understand.
Reverse roles, talk a little bit about it from the other side, and look forward to doing that in our next video.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Dad.